It's so nice that you asked about this. This is not a piece that I typically give talks about or really get to share with people, but it's one that I really love. It is a ethnographic fiction. The title is just 53 kilos, and the title is drawn from the weight limit that you can take basically in 2 suitcases and a carry-on. What can you carry with you from Nepal to the United States? And in that story, I'm looking at a web of family relationships. The primary relationship in the story is between my main character and her husband, who are in a pretty difficult situation. They're actually separating from each other, although it's not clear that he knows that, or that really the people around them know that, right? She is going to the United States for some training, for some professional development, but what I know as her friend and as the kind of person telling the story is that she's actually not sure that she's planning to come back into this marriage. And so as she's making that plan to leave and thinking about what she's going to take with her, so many people in her life, her in-laws, her relatives, her friends and neighbors, they are all dropping by the house to give her things that they want to take, or that they want her to take for them, to family or to friends in the United States. And I, in part, was inspired to write this story because as I was doing my fieldwork in Nepal, just literally everyone that I talked to had family abroad in some capacity, right? Whether that's someone who's running a company in New York City or someone who's working as a security guard in Singapore, right? Everyone in Nepal has family elsewhere. And a big part of maintaining those ties and connections is sending material objects to people by means of other people when you can, right? So it was very common for me to be asked by people like, oh, you're going back to the United States. Can you take this to my friend? She lives in Tennessee, but can you just put it in your suitcase and then when you get to the US, you can mail it to her. And I thought this was such an interesting custom and a beautiful way for people to maintain those bonds and connections. And so when I was thinking about this story, which is, I'll say, somewhat based on a true story of a relationship that I had with someone who, was really in the process of packing up and planning to leave and not sure when or if she was going to come back. And as people kept coming and giving her these different items and objects that they wanted her to take, she really was thinking, what can I really squeeze into this very strict limit of 53 kilograms? And what does that mean for the web of relationships that I'm a part of? So my work on women's rights to pass on citizenship to their children in Nepal has been really interesting and rewarding because I got to work with a lot of people who were very passionate and very committed to this kind of political activist movement to have women's rights recognized, essentially. In Nepal, citizenship is primarily based on inheritance from your parents rather than where you were born. So in order to get a full citizenship, you might say, you need to be able to prove that your father was a Nepali citizen. If you can't prove that, but you can prove that your mother is a Nepali citizen, you might be able to get citizenship, but in just as a naturalized citizen, which is slightly more restricted, and it's subject to kind of bureaucratic discretion. You wouldn't be able to become like the president or the prime minister, right? So there are some limitations on that category of citizenship. The women who I worked with were really passionate about this because they saw it not only as obviously affecting their children's futures and their children's status in the country, but because they saw it as reflecting on their own citizenship as well, right? They're like, if I can't give my citizenship to my child, what is it really worth? Am I really a citizen? In the same way that a man who is a citizen can just if a man is a citizen and he has a child, no one's going to question whether that child should be considered a full citizen, right? So for them, they saw it as reflecting the state's opinion of them as not really being citizens in the same way that men were. So when I started doing my fieldwork in Nepal, I actually was not planning to study social media per se, right? I was interested in how do people live through periods of really major social and political change, right? Nepal was in the middle of rewriting its constitution. It had been a long and drawn out process, thinking about national identity and how that's getting redefined. But the years of my fieldwork were, I went to Nepal for the first time in 2011, and then my longest period of fieldwork was 2014 to 2015, both years, the full 2 years. And then I have done a few more follow-up visits since then. And that just happened to coincide with this major explosion in the availability and the uptake of the internet, first of all, and then social media technologies and platforms across Nepal more broadly. So it really felt like it would have been impossible for me to study contemporary politics without also thinking about the platforms and the spaces that people were creating for themselves online to share their views and to organize themselves around the ideas that they cared about and the causes that they wanted to support. So yeah, that's kind of how I came into studying social media. And I think for my research, studying social media, including what we might think of as like digital ethnographic methods, alongside our more traditional ethnographic methods, has just felt like a really natural process of those two things going together. And I think that, in my opinion, the digital ethnographies that I'm most interested in reading typically have a lot of the more traditional ethnographic components worked in there as well. Yeah, I don't think there's a substitute necessarily for spending time in a place, spending time with people. But the internet is a place as well, right? And so thinking about that as just kind of part of the social world that you're studying just makes a lot of sense to me. I think the interesting thing here is that those two goals are not necessarily in conflict, right? Where in the case of the YouTubers that I'm writing about, they feel a sense of obligation to tell the world that Buddha was born in Nepal, right? This sense of a national claim to Buddha's birthplace is very important for a kind of specific flavor of Nepali nationalism that I've written about a lot. But in order to do that job of telling the world that Buddha was born in Nepal, it's also useful for them if people are actually watching their videos, right? If those messages that they're sending out are actually getting some uptake, right? So it is to their advantage to embed that claim in a broader kind of set of conventions and genres and tropes and memes that make up internet culture more broadly. So when I've looked at these three articles and done what I call a kind of ethnographically informed close reading of these videos as texts, I'm not only thinking about, okay, how do these videos and their content play in terms of thinking about Nepal's internal politics or the politics of the Nepali diaspora. I'm looking at the ways in which these YouTubers are embedding their message into kind of broader themes and tropes and genres of internet culture, right? Where they're trying to reach out to broader audiences and make themselves more memorable and more recognizable, and make Nepal more memorable and more recognizable, and use Buddha's birthplace as the kind of grounding claim to help them do both of those things. I think that's a great question. So when I think about Nepali Digital Diaspora and Microcelebrity, it does seem clear to me that part of what it means to be a Nepali citizen abroad, whether it's a citizen in a legal sense or maybe just in a broader social sense, is that people tend to feel a sense of responsibility to represent Nepal in a positive light as much as they can, right? And this is very understandable to me because lots of Nepalis who are maybe living in the US or the UK, they meet a lot of people who don't even know that Nepal exists, right? Or they don't understand that Nepal is a country, or maybe their ideas about Nepal are very limited, very stereotyping, that kind of thing. So it's not at all surprising to me that the Nepali digital diaspora includes a lot of trying to represent Nepal in a positive light as much as possible, and that people feel like making themselves more familiar and more recognizable and kind of speaking to the global culture of the internet in a way that positions Nepal positively. That just makes a lot of sense to me as a thing that people would feel compelled to do. Now, you asked if that is specific to post-colonial nation states and their digital diasporas. And I would have to think about that a little bit more. I'm most familiar, of course, with Nepal's digital diaspora. That's what my area of study has been. But I would say that I think it makes sense to me for any nation state, and this is probably not strictly related to post-colonial states, but any nation state's people that feel like they have something to prove to the wider world, whether that's something to prove just about the legitimacy of their nation state, their kind of right to exist, or something about their national identity, their national reputation. I think that there is potential for that dynamic of microcelebrity as a form of digital citizenship to become important. So currently, I actually work at the Social Science Research Council. I'm a program officer for the Data Fluencies Project. This is a little bit outside of a traditional academic career, one might say. I've done a few stints at different universities as a professor, but I wanted the opportunity to step outside of that a little bit and get a broader view of what's going on in research and get some experience supporting research. I will say it's really nice to be on the side of the table where I get to give out grants rather than applying for them all the time. So that has been really fun. And the work that we have been able to support, I'm really proud of. We do a dissertation research competition that has had some really amazing grantees. And I've helped to organize some workshops on labor and technology, on data politics and AI policy that have supported the work of researchers across the social sciences, data sciences, and humanities in a way that I have felt really great about. And I feel like that's been a wonderful opportunity for me to learn a lot, meet a lot of interesting people, and support some really great projects.